The echoing bustle of DC's Metro Center station faded as Officer Donovan blocked his path. "Hold up," he snapped at Elias Vance, 17, hoodie shadowing his face. "Let's see some ID." Elias produced a sleek, dark card, unlike any standard issue. Donovan smirked, snatching it. "What's this supposed to be, kid? Your library card got a fancy upgrade." He chuckled, turning it over, ready to dismiss it as a fake. Then his eyes snagged on the gold seal. His laughter died instantly. How quickly can mockery turn to fear? Officer Donovan's smug chuckle caught in his throat, dying with an almost audible choke. The sleek dark card felt suddenly heavy, alien in his hand. His eyes, moments before narrowed in cynical dismissal, now widened in disbelief, fixed on the unmistakable, intricately detailed gold embossing of the presidential seal of the United States beneath Elias Vance's photograph. Below the seal, printed in crisp, authoritative lettering, was a title that seemed utterly incongruous with the 17-year-old in a hoodie standing before him. Special Assistant to the President. A wave of icy panic washed over Donovan, prickling his skin beneath his uniform. His mind scrambled, replaying his mocking words, his aggressive posture, the blatant assumption he had made based entirely on Elias's race and attire. Special Assistant to the President. It wasn't just an official ID, it was credentials linked directly to the most powerful office on Earth. The color drained from Donovan's face, leaving it pale and clammy under the harsh fluorescent lights of the Metro Center station. He suddenly felt overly warm, his collar tight. He fumbled the card slightly, almost dropping it, his earlier bravado evaporating like mist. "Ah," he stammered, his voice suddenly raspy, uncertain. This is... I didn't... See that clearly at first, son. Routine check, you understand. Station security protocols. We gotta be vigilant." His eyes darted around, suddenly hyper-aware of the streams of commuters flowing past them, wondering if anyone had noticed his initial hostility, his unprofessional mockery. Had anyone recorded it? Elias watched the officer's rapid transformation, with a practiced, weary calm that belied the knot of familiar anger tightening in his gut. This wasn't the first time he'd been stopped, questioned, judged based on his appearance. It was a constant, exhausting tax on his existence, a reminder that his skin color and his choice of casual clothing often mattered more than his character or his destination. But the connection to his godmother, President Eleanor Hayes, added a layer of complexity, a potential shield that often felt more like a spotlight, attracting unwanted attention and, as now, potentially dangerous misunderstandings. He hated using the ID, hated the way it instantly changed dynamics, often replacing one kind of scrutiny with another, more complicated kind. But sometimes, like now, it was the only way to cut through the prejudice and simply be allowed to go about his business. He kept his expression neutral, meeting Donovan's now fearful gaze steadily. "I understand the need for security, officer," Elias said, his voice quiet but clear, holding no trace of the nervousness Donovan now radiated. He held out his hand for the ID. Donovan practically thrust it back at him, his movements jerky, avoiding direct eye contact. "Right, well, everything appears to be in order, Mr. Vance. Sorry for the delay. You have a good day now." He took a half-step back, almost tripping over his own feet, eager to end the interaction, to make Elias disappear. Elias slid the sleek card back into his wallet, secured it in his pocket, and gave a curt nod. "You too, officer." Without another word, he turned and walked away, merging back into the river of commuters heading towards the train platforms. He didn't look back, but he could feel Donovan's eyes fixed on him until he rounded a corner. The encounter left him shaken, not by fear of the officer himself, but by the constant grating reminder of how easily his presence could be deemed suspicious, how quickly assumptions could escalate. The relief of being allowed to proceed was tainted by the humiliation of the stop, the anger at the officer's initial disrespect, and the underlying worry about whether this incident, like others before it, might somehow ripple outwards. "Officer." Donovan stood frozen for a moment after Elias disappeared, his heart still pounding. Humiliation warred with fear. He'd messed up, potentially badly. Stopping a kid was one thing. Stopping someone with clear White House credentials, someone potentially connected directly to President Hayes, based on nothing more than a hoodie and skin color, that could have serious repercussions. His mind raced. He pulled out his departmental handheld device, his fingers slightly unsteady as he logged the stop. He kept the entry minimal, deliberately vague. Briefly detained individual matching general. Lookout description, ID checked, cleared, no further action. He omitted the mockery, the confrontation over the ID, the specific title, anything that could flag it for review or reveal the true nature of the encounter or his unprofessional conduct. It was a lie of omission, a desperate attempt at self-preservation. But even as he tried to bury the incident in bureaucratic neutrality, a seed of resentment began to fester alongside the fear. He felt foolish, exposed. That kid, with his calm demeanor and his impossibly powerful ID, had made him look like an idiot, had held undeniable power over him in that moment. The imbalance felt wrong, unnatural to Donovan's sense of order. He shoved the handheld back, onto his belt, straightened his uniform and forced himself to resume his patrol. But the image of the presidential seal on that sleek, dark card and the cool gaze of the president's godson lingered, unsettling and ominous. The incident felt closed yet somehow dangerously unfinished. Back in the relative anonymity of the transit police substation beneath Metro Center, the adrenaline from the encounter with Elias Vance slowly receded, leaving Officer Donovan with a gnawing mix of residual fear and simmering resentment. The minimalist log entry he'd made on his handheld felt insufficient, too vague. What if the kid complained? What if someone had recorded the initial confrontation, the part where he'd clearly mocked the ID before recognizing the seal? He needed a more robust defense, an official narrative that painted his actions in the best possible light, justifying the stop regardless of the ID's ultimate legitimacy. He sat down at a shared terminal in the noisy report room, the clatter of keyboards and radio chatter a familiar backdrop, and began composing the formal incident report. He chose his words with deliberate care, constructing a version of events that subtly shifted blame and emphasized procedure. He described initiating the stop based on Elias matching the general physical description of individuals previously cited for fare evasion, and noted Elias was lingering near the turnstiles, in a manner deemed suspicious. He described Elias's attire, the hoodie, emphasizing that it obscured facial recognition. He characterized Elias's initial response as hesitant and potentially evasive, conveniently omitting his own immediate hostility and mockery. Regarding the ID check, he wrote that the individual presented credentials which, after careful verification, proved valid, leading to the termination of the stop. He completely left out the presidential seal, the specific title, and his own panicked reaction, framing it as a routine verification of an unusual but ultimately legitimate ID. Donovan justified his actions on paper, twisting the narrative to protect himself from potential repercussions, conveniently omitting the prejudice that had actually triggered the stop. Is it ever okay for an officer to file a misleading report, even if they feel threatened or made a mistake? Comment number 1, if you think accountability and truthfulness should always come first in law enforcement reporting. He submitted the report electronically, feeling a grudging sense of security, hoping it would bury the incident deep within the department's digital archives. But information, once released, has a tendency to flow in unpredictable ways. Donovan's skewed report, flagged automatically due to the mention of unusual credentials even without specifics, landed in the daily review queue of his direct supervisor, Sergeant Miller. Miller was a sharp, ambitious officer with a reputation for strict adherence to regulations, at least officially, and a known political conservative who made no secret of his disdain for President Hayes's administration. Sitting in his small, tidy office adorned with commendations and a framed photo of him shaking hands with a prominent conservative senator, Miller read Donovan's report with a critical eye. It seemed incomplete. The justification for the stop felt thin, the description of the ID check overly vague. Donovan wasn't usually this circumspect. Miller made a mental note to have a chat with Donovan later. Around the same time, further complicating matters, a short 20-second video clip surfaced fleetingly on a popular social media platform known for citizen journalism and uploads of police encounters. Filmed shakily on a bystander's phone, from across the platform, the low-resolution video captured the initial moments of the confrontation. It clearly showed Officer Donovan aggressively stopping Elias, his body language confrontational, his voice audible though slightly distorted, asking for ID with clear derision. It showed Elias in his hoodie looking startled, but not aggressive. Crucially, the clip ended abruptly before Elias presented the ID, capturing only the initial problematic interaction based purely on appearance. The video gained a few thousand views and a handful of angry comments about profiling, before it was either flagged and removed by platform moderators for unclear content or perhaps deliberately taken down by the original poster fearing involvement. But it was online long enough for someone to download it, long enough for a notification algorithm on a media monitoring service used by certain political operatives to flag it based on keywords like Metro Police, profiling, and the location tag. Sergeant Miller happened to catch sight of the blurry video via a link shared internally among some officers before it vanished. Seeing Donovan's aggressive approach, combined with the sanitized, vague report he'd just read, piqued Miller's interest further. Why was Donovan downplaying this? What kind of ID warrants this level of careful omission in a report? He saved a copy of the vanished video file to a secure drive. Miller didn't know Elias Vance personally, nor did he immediately grasp the full significance of the sleek ID card Elias carried. But he sensed something worth looking into, a potential disciplinary issue for Donovan at minimum, or perhaps something more significant given the current political climate in D.C. and his own network of contacts who were always interested in potential embarrassments for the Hayes administration. The seeds of trouble, planted by Donovan's prejudice and watered by his deceptive report, had found potentially fertile ground on Sergeant Miller's desk. The combination of a misleading report and a partial video creates a dangerous situation. If you're already sensing trouble brewing for Elias and want to see how these seeds of deception grow into something much larger, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the political gears starting to turn. But how quickly would Miller act on his suspicions? And who else might have noticed that fleeting video clip or heard whispers about the unusual stop at Metro Center involving a young black man with very special credentials? The stage was being set for the incident to escape the confines of the Transit Police Department and enter a much more dangerous arena. Sergeant Miller didn't sit on his suspicions or the sanitized report for long. His ambition and his deep-seated opposition to President Hayes's progressive agenda spurred him to action, albeit cautiously. He knew direct confrontation or official escalation within the transit police might backfire, especially if Donovan's report, however skewed, mentioned valid credentials. Instead, he utilized a discreet back channel, a contact cultivated over years within the network of conservative political operatives and staffers, always hungry for information that could be used against the current administration. He forwarded a carefully worded summary of the incident, highlighting the vagueness of Donovan's report, the existence of the now vanished bystander video showing Donovan's initial aggression, and the unusual nature of the unspecified credentials presented by the young black man in the hoodie. He didn't explicitly name Elias Vance or the presidential connection he didn't yet fully grasp, but he provided enough detail to pique interest, framing it as a potential instance of either police misconduct needing quiet internal handling or perhaps something politically sensitive requiring awareness at higher levels. The information traveled quickly through the hushed corridors of power, landing precisely where Miller had hoped, though perhaps indirectly, on the desk of Senator Alistair Finch. Finch, a senior senator from a staunchly conservative state, was President Hayes's most vocal and arguably most dangerous political adversary. From his imposing office in the Russell Senate Office building, surrounded by dark wood, leather-bound books, and portraits of past conservative icons, Finch waged a relentless legislative and public relations war against Hayes's policies. He received the initial summary from Miller's contact via his shrewd, fiercely loyal chief of staff, Evelyn Reed. Reed had already cross-referenced the date, time, location, and vague description with other intelligence streams, including possibly accessing the briefly public bystander video through their sophisticated media monitoring setup before it disappeared. She had also discreetly pulled Metro Police personnel files, identifying Officer Donovan and Sergeant Miller. When Reed presented the compiled information, including a still frame from the blurry video showing Elias's face partially obscured by the hoodie, Senator Finch recognized the boy instantly. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Elias Vance. He knew the connection well, though it wasn't widely publicized. The president's godson, the orphaned child of Hayes's closest college friend whom she had taken under her wing. After the parents' tragic accident years ago, Finch saw past the immediate details of a questionable police stop. He saw political gold, a potential scandal involving the president's surrogate family, touching on themes of race, privilege, security, youth behavior. It was a perfect storm, a potential multi-pronged attack vector against President Hayes herself. The initial incident, Finch surmised, was likely just low-level racial profiling by an overzealous transit cop, but the potential narrative was what mattered. "Interesting," Finch murmured, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "Very interesting indeed. A young man with unique access, dressed somewhat incongruously, involved in a police stop that gets hushed up in the report. What else is there, Evelyn?" Reed anticipated the question. "Sergeant Miller, the supervisor, seems cooperative, politically aligned. He suspects his officer, Donovan, is hiding something about the specific credentials shown. Miller has the original skewed report and a copy of the video fragment." Finch nodded, his mind already several steps ahead. "Encourage Sergeant Miller's diligence," he instructed Reed, his voice smooth as silk, but carrying an unmistakable undertone of command. "Ensure he understands that a thorough, albeit discreet, review of this entire incident, including this young Mr. Vance's recent activities and associations, is a matter of civic importance. See that he feels supported in his efforts to ensure departmental integrity." He didn't need to be more explicit. Reed understood perfectly. The message would be relayed through channels. Dig into Elias Vance, find anything remotely usable, anything that could be twisted or amplified. Miller, eager for advancement and validation from powerful figures like Finch, would undoubtedly comply. But Finch knew relying solely on a potentially clumsy police sergeant wasn't enough. This required professionals. "And Evelyn," Finch added, "allocate discretionary funds. I want discreet, top-tier surveillance initiated on Mr. Vance immediately. Movements, communications, online activity, associates. Nothing intrusive enough to alert White House security yet, but I want a comprehensive picture. I want to know everything about the president's godson. Find a vulnerability." Within hours, the machinery of political opposition research whirred into motion. A high-priced, DC-based private security firm, known for its discretion and effectiveness in handling sensitive political assignments, was contracted through a layer of cutouts managed by Finch's office. Experienced operatives began the subtle task of tracking Elias Vance. They noted his school schedule, his hangouts, his rare, low-key visits to the White House complex, likely using the very ID Donovan had mocked, the friends he associated with. They initiated background checks, scanned his public social media profiles, which were relatively sparse and privacy-locked, and began mapping his digital footprint. Elias, meanwhile, tried to push the unsettling Metro Center encounter from his mind. He attended his classes at his prestigious DC private school, worked on college applications, hung out with friends, occasionally visited his godmother during quiet moments in her schedule, navigating the strange duality of his life as normally as possible. He remained completely unaware that his identity, his privacy, and his connection to the president had just made him the prime target in a high-stakes political game orchestrated by one of the most ruthless men in Washington, a man who saw him, not as a 17-year-old kid, but as a pawn to be strategically positioned and ultimately sacrificed. The invisible net began to close. Senator Finch didn't wait long for the surveillance on Elias Vance to yield usable material. Or rather, material that could be twisted into usability. His operatives provided grainy telephoto shots of Elias entering and leaving his private school, riding the metro, sometimes meeting friends, all perfectly normal teenage activities, but easily painted as furtive or aimless when stripped of context. They also had the blurry bystander video clip from the metro center stop. Combining these elements with carefully crafted innuendo, Finch's team, working through trusted contacts in the partisan media ecosystem, launched the first public salvo. The attack wasn't a bombshell exposé in a major newspaper. It was more insidious, appearing first on a notoriously aggressive right-wing political blog known for its inflammatory rhetoric and loose relationship with facts. The blog post, titled "Exclusive Hayes' Mystery Assistant, Teen Godson Flaunts Secret White House Access on DC Metro," used the blurry photo of Elias in his hoodie alongside out-of-context shots of him near government buildings. It recounted a distorted version of the Metro Center incident, citing anonymous witnesses and selectively quoting from Officer Donovan's skewed report, which Finch's network had likely obtained via Miller. The article painted Elias as an arrogant, potentially delinquent youth. Why the disguise? What was he really doing? Who used mysterious high-level credentials? Is this appropriate access for a teenager? To intimidate a police officer simply doing his job? The piece dripped with suggestion, questioning the judgment of President Hayes in granting such access and implying Elias was abusing vaguely defined privileges. Within hours, the blog post was amplified across sympathetic social media accounts, shared with inflammatory commentary by partisan influencers, and picked up by fringe news aggregators. Hashtags like the Mock Metro Mystery and Hayes Nepotism began to circulate in certain online echo chambers. While it didn't break through significantly into mainstream news, it created a distinct undercurrent of negative chatter, precisely as Finch intended, poisoning the well, creating a narrative of entitlement and suspicion around the president's godson. Elias discovered the attack when a concerned friend cautiously sent him the link. Seeing his own face, however blurry, attached to such ugly lies and distortions felt like a physical blow. He read the comments section, a toxic stew of assumptions, accusations, and coded racist remarks about a young black man having access to power. It was deeply painful, a violation that felt different from the direct confrontation with Donovan. This was colder, more calculated, broadcast to the world. He felt a confusing mix of anger, helplessness, and a heavy weight of guilt that his mere existence could be weaponized against his godmother, President Hayes. News of the blog post and its online spread reached the White House communications team almost immediately. President Hayes was briefed by her chief of staff, her initial reaction a flash of protective fury, quickly followed by cold political calculation. She knew Finch was behind this. It bore all the hallmarks of his attack style, using proxies, twisting facts, targeting personal connections. After a brief, tense strategy session with her senior advisors, they decided on a swift, factual, but restrained response. Overreacting would only amplify the smear. The official White House press secretary issued a concise statement during the daily briefing and released it online. The statement confirmed Elias Vance was indeed the president's godson, acknowledged he possessed credentials, facilitating limited, appropriate access related to his unique situation as part of the president's close family support network, and clarified that the specific ID shown during a brief routine transit stop was verified as valid. It firmly refuted any suggestion of arrogance or wrongdoing on Elias's part and condemned the shameful, politically motivated attempt to exploit a minor and distort a routine interaction for partisan gain. The statement was calm, professional, and aimed to starve the story of oxygen. For a short while, it seemed to work. Mainstream outlets reported the White House statement, largely framing the initial blog post as a fringe attack. The online chatter seemed to subside slightly. Within Elias's immediate circle and the White House, there was a collective, cautious exhale. Perhaps the swift, firm rebuttal had been enough to quash this particular line of attack. Seeing his face twisted into a symbol of entitlement online was deeply painful for Elias. Do you think it's ever fair to target a young person, even one connected to power, for political gain? Comment number 1. If you believe minors should be unequivocally off-limits in political attacks, regardless of family connections. The White House response was measured, designed to shut down the narrative quickly. If you admire the way they defended Elias while trying to de-escalate and want to see if this strategy truly silences Senator Finch's operation, hit that like button and subscribe because the backlash is far from over. But had the official statement truly extinguished the fire? Or had it merely provided Senator Finch with confirmation that he'd hit a nerve, encouraging him to escalate his tactics from online smears to something far more direct and personal against Elias himself? The White House press secretary's calm, factual statement intended to smother the nascent smear campaign against Elias Vance, instead acted like gasoline thrown onto embers. Senator Finch and his network immediately seized upon it, twisting the administration's defense into proof of guilt and cover-up. Partisan commentators decried the stonewalling, asking what the White House was hiding about the president's godson and his special privileges. Fringe news sites ran follow-up pieces questioning the vagueness of the statement regarding Elias's ID and access. The official defense, rather than providing closure, inadvertently confirmed Elias's connection and elevated his profile, making him a more visible and apparently more vulnerable target. Finch had successfully framed the narrative. Any defense of Elias was merely proof of the administration circling the wagons around one of their elite entitled own. The consequences for Elias were immediate and deeply unnerving. The subtle surveillance directed by Finch escalated into overt aggressive harassment, designed to intimidate and perhaps provoke a reaction. The feeling of being watched intensified. Cars, usually nondescript sedans, began tailgating him when he drove the old car he sometimes used, staying uncomfortably close for miles before peeling off abruptly. He started noticing the same unfamiliar faces in different locations: a man lingering near the entrance to his school, a woman seemingly engrossed in a newspaper at his usual weekend coffee spot, who appeared again near the metro station he now tried to avoid. They weren't trying hard to blend in anymore. Their presence felt deliberate, menacingly conspicuous. The online sphere became significantly more toxic. Beyond the general negative chatter, Elias began receiving direct messages on his sparsely used, locked-down social media accounts, anonymous threats, ugly racist slurs, messages filled with vitriol directed at him and President Hayes. Some messages contained disturbing details about his daily routine, mentioning the coffee shop he frequented, the route he walked to school, indicating the surveillance was feeding this digital intimidation. It felt deeply violating, erasing any sense of private space, online or off. He reported the most explicit threats through the platform's channels, but they often came from burner accounts that disappeared quickly, only to be replaced by new ones. He felt surrounded, bombarded by unseen, unknown enemies. Then came the police stop, different in tone and execution from Officer Donovan's initial encounter, yet clearly stemming from the same poisoned well. Elias was walking home from a friend's house one evening, cutting through a well-lit public park, when a patrol car abruptly pulled alongside him, lights flashing. Two officers emerged, their expressions hard, their stance immediately confrontational. These weren't transit cops, they were regular MPD officers, but Elias recognized one as having been frequently parked near Sergeant Miller's substation. "Evening," one officer barked, his hand resting pointedly on his sidearm. "Mind telling us what you're doing out here?" Elias, heart pounding but forcing himself to remain calm and polite, explained he was walking home. "See some ID," the officer demanded, his partner circling around behind Elias, creating an intimidating physical dynamic. Elias produced his regular driver's license this time, not wanting to escalate with the special ID unless absolutely necessary. The officer scrutinized it, then shone his flashlight directly into Elias's eyes. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for, involved in some petty thefts around here." Elias knew this was false. He looked nothing like the vague description they offered when he pressed them. "Mind if we take a look in your backpack?" the officer asked, though it was clearly not a question. Without waiting for explicit consent, the officer grabbed Elias's backpack and began rummaging through it roughly, pulling out textbooks, notebooks, a water bottle, dumping them onto the park bench beside them. The search was deliberately invasive, performatively thorough, designed to humiliate and inconvenience him under the park's lights. They found nothing, of course. After several tense minutes, they shoved his belongings back towards him. "All right," the first officer said grudgingly. "Guess it wasn't you this time. Stay out of trouble." His partner added a parting sneer, "And maybe try not to look so suspicious next time." They got back in their car and drove off, leaving Elias shaken, his belongings scattered on the bench, feeling violated and acutely aware of his vulnerability. This wasn't random. It was calculated harassment, sanctioned, he suspected, by Sergeant Miller, likely acting under the encouragement stemming from Senator Finch's directive. They were trying to rattle him, perhaps hoping he would react angrily, providing them with a pretext for arrest, or simply aiming to make his life unbearable. The cumulative effect of the constant watching, the online venom, and the aggressive police encounter was profound. Elias began to feel hunted. His usual routes felt unsafe, public spaces exposed. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, scanning faces in crowds, second-guessing his decisions. He became more withdrawn, reluctant to burden his friends with the strange, politically charged danger surrounding him, a danger he couldn't fully explain or prove. The city, his home, started to feel like hostile territory. The false dawn provided by the White House statement had proven illusory. Instead of protection, it had seemingly painted an even larger target on his back, unleashing forces determined to break him through direct, relentless pressure. Senator Finch, reviewing the surveillance reports and the lack of any exploitable reaction from Elias Vance, despite the increased harassment, grew impatient. The boy was proving frustratingly resilient, his calm demeanor offering no openings for public scandal. If Elias wouldn't create an incident himself, Finch decided, then an incident would be created for him. The directive went down through channels, likely from Finch's Chief of Staff, Evelyn Reed, to an intermediary, then to Sergeant Miller, who understood the implicit command, find a way to plant something incriminating on the president's godson. Something small, deniable if it went wrong, but damaging enough to create leverage. Drugs, perhaps, or a recently reported stolen item. Officer Donovan, already compromised and resentful, was deemed the ideal tool for the job. The opportunity came a few days later. Elias was leaving a study group session at a library branch located a few blocks from his school. He was walking alone towards the nearest metro stop, backpack slung over one shoulder. As he passed a somewhat secluded alleyway often used as a shortcut, Officer Donovan seemingly appeared out of nowhere, stepping out to block his path once again. This time Donovan wasn't alone. Another transit officer Elias didn't recognize stood slightly behind him, ostensibly as backup. "Mr. Vance," Donovan said, his voice attempting neutrality but failing to mask an underlying tension. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area, possible drug transactions. We need to ask you a few questions, maybe take a look in your bag." Elias froze, his senses immediately on high alert. The contrived nature of the encounter, Donovan's reappearance, the specific mention of drugs, it screamed setup. The lessons from the previous aggressive stop, the constant feeling of being watched, had honed his vigilance to a razor's edge. "I haven't seen any suspicious activity, officer," Elias replied calmly, keeping his hands visible away from his pockets or bag. "I'm just heading home from the library." Donovan ignored him. "Standard procedure. Let's see the backpack." Elias knew refusing could be twisted into obstruction, so he slowly slipped the backpack off his shoulder, holding it out in front of him, rather than letting Donovan grab it immediately. As Donovan took the bag, Elias watched his hands like a hawk. Donovan made a show of unzipping the main compartment, peering inside. Then, with his other hand, the one momentarily obscured from Elias's direct line of sight by the bag itself, Donovan made a swift, subtle movement towards his own utility belt pouch, then back towards the open backpack. It was a fractional movement, easily missed, but Elias's hyper-focus caught it. Just as Donovan began to rummage inside the bag with his previously empty hand, Elias reacted instantly and decisively. "Whoa, hang on," Elias said loudly, taking a step back and raising his voice slightly, enough to potentially draw attention from anyone nearby on the main street bordering the alley. "What did you just put in my bag, officer?" Donovan froze, startled by the direct accusation. The second officer shifted nervously. "I didn't put anything in your bag," Donovan blustered, trying to regain control. "I'm conducting a lawful search." "I saw your hand," Elias insisted, his voice steady but firm, not backing down. He deliberately didn't reach for the bag himself. "You reached into your pouch and then put something in my backpack. I want everyone to see what you just tried to plant on me." His raised voice attracted the attention of a woman walking her dog just at the mouth of the alley. She paused, watching curiously. Donovan glanced towards the bystander, then back at Elias, his face flushing with anger and perhaps panic. The clumsy plant attempt had been exposed, with a potential witness present, and Elias refusing to play along or touch the potentially planted item. Donovan was trapped. He couldn't proceed without revealing his own actions. He abruptly zipped the backpack shut and practically threw it back at Elias. "Fine," he snarled. "Nothing here. But we're watching you, kid. Don't think we're not." He and the other officer turned quickly and walked away, disappearing back down the alley. Their mission aborted, their frustration palpable. Elias stood there for a moment, his legs trembling slightly, the backpack feeling contaminated in his hands. He quickly checked inside. Tucked into a side pocket was a small, clear plastic baggie containing a few white pills he didn't recognize. He felt sick. They had actually tried it. They had tried to frame him. He didn't discard the baggie. Instead, he carefully zipped it back up, knowing it was now crucial evidence of the attempt itself. As soon as he was safely away from the area, he pulled out his phone, bypassing Marcus Jones this time. This was too direct, too dangerous, involving active police misconduct aimed at framing him. He dialed the direct, secure number he had been given for emergencies, connecting him to Agent Thorne, the head of President Hayes' Secret Service detail. "Agent Thorne," Elias said, his voice low but urgent. "It's Elias Vance. I need to report an incident immediately." He quickly recounted the entire encounter, detailing Donovan's presence, the pretext for the stop, the suspicious hand movement, his own challenge, the officer's retreat, and the discovery of the planted pills in his bag, emphasizing he had not touched the baggie itself. Agent Thorne listened intently, his calm demeanor doing little to hide the gravity with which he received the information. He asked several precise questions, then assured Elias that the matter would be handled at the highest level and instructed him on secure procedures for handing over the backpack with the planted evidence. Elias's quick thinking and hyper-vigilance under pressure had prevented the frame-up. That close call was terrifying. Do you think Elias reporting it directly to the Secret Service was the right move, or could it put him in even more danger? Comment number 1 with your thoughts on his decision. He had concrete proof now, not just of harassment but of an active, illegal attempt by at least one officer to plant drugs on him. If you admire Elias's courage and quick wit in thwarting this dangerous setup, hit that like button and subscribe to see how the White House and Secret Service respond to this blatant criminal act by the police. But even as Agent Thorne assured him of protection, a chilling thought remained. They had failed to frame him with a minor drug charge. How would Senator Finch, the unseen architect of this escalating persecution, react to this failure? Would he back down, or would he simply raise the stakes dramatically, aiming for a frame-up so sophisticated, so damaging, that Elias couldn't possibly escape? News of Officer Donovan's failed attempt to plant drugs on Elias Vance reached Senator Alastair Finch's office with infuriating speed, likely relayed up the chain from a panicked Sergeant Miller via Finch's intermediaries. Finch listened, impassively as his Chief of Staff, Evelyn Reed, delivered the report. But his tightly clenched jaw and the glacial coldness in his eyes betrayed his fury. The sheer incompetence was galling. Using street-level police tactics against the president's Godson, especially after Elias had demonstrated awareness of being targeted, was amateurish and clumsy. Worse, Elias had apparently reported the attempt directly to the president's Secret Service detail, escalating the situation internally within the White House and potentially putting Finch's network, including Sergeant Miller, at greater Risk of exposure if a serious investigation into police misconduct was launched. Finch realized immediately that his previous strategy needed a drastic overhaul. Simple harassment wasn't working, and physical planting of evidence was now too dangerous, likely anticipated by both Elias and his protectors. If they wanted to neutralize Elias Vance as a potential liability and simultaneously inflict maximum political damage on President Hayes, they needed a more sophisticated, more insidious line of attack, one that struck at the very heart of Hayes's presidency, national security and trust. The boy's unique access, the very thing Donovan had initially mocked him for, now presented itself to Finch not as a shield for Elias, but as the perfect weapon to use against him, and by extension, against President Hayes. The narrative shifted in Finch's calculating mind. Elias Vance wasn't just an entitled teenager. He was a potential security risk, a naive kid with proximity to power who could be manipulated or, even better, portrayed as having recklessly misused his access. "Street thugs and clumsy cops are insufficient, Evelyn," Finch stated quietly, his voice dangerously soft. "This requires precision. We need to pivot. The objective is no longer to paint the boy as a delinquent, but as a liability. A potential threat vector to White House security." Reed understood immediately. "The digital angle, Senator?" Finch nodded slowly. "Exactly. Create the appearance of impropriety. Suggest unauthorized access, attempts to view classified materials, misuse of credentials even if minor. Plant digital breadcrumbs that lead investigators, or the media when we leak it, to question his judgment, and more importantly, the President's judgment in granting him any level of access at all. It plays into existing anxieties about security, about insider threats." The directive went out, bypassing Sergeant Miller and the transit police entirely, flowing instead to a different, more covert branch of Finch's operation, a small, highly skilled team of cyber operatives, hackers for hire who specialized in political black ops and digital disinformation, operating from untraceable servers, likely located overseas. Their task was complex: create a subtle, deniable digital trail that would implicate Elias Vance in attempting to access information far beyond his clearance or need to know, using methods that would appear to originate from his known devices or accounts. The cyber team went to work immediately, employing a multi-pronged approach. Spearphishing emails, meticulously crafted to look like legitimate communications from Elias's school, his friends, or even generic White House internal announcements, began appearing in his inbox, containing cleverly disguised malicious links or attachments designed to install spyware or keyloggers if clicked. They attempted brute force attacks, albeit low and slow to avoid immediate detection, on his personal email and cloud storage accounts, probing for weak passwords or security vulnerabilities. More insidiously, they began using sophisticated spoofing techniques. Network traffic, designed to mimic attempts to access secure government servers, perhaps low-level State Department databases or unclassified but sensitive policy briefing portals, was carefully crafted to appear as if originating from the IP addresses associated with Elias's home network or his school's Wi-Fi. They may have even attempted brief proximity attacks, using signal interceptors near places he frequented, hoping to capture login credentials or inject malicious code onto his phone or laptop wirelessly. The goal wasn't necessarily to gain full control of his devices or steal massive amounts of data, but to create digital footprints, logs, fragments of activity that, when inevitably reviewed by security analysts or leaked selectively, would paint a picture of recklessness and unauthorized curiosity. Elias, while still reeling from the attempted drug planting and maintaining a heightened state of physical awareness, wasn't initially attuned to this new, invisible form of assault. He noticed a few odd emails that he quickly deleted as probable spam. His laptop seemed slightly sluggish on occasion, which he attributed to needing an update. He received one notification about an unusual login attempt on a social media account, prompting him to change his password and enable two-factor authentication, assuming it was random hacking. He remained unaware that these seemingly minor, disparate digital annoyances were actually targeted probes, the subtle weaving of a complex digital net designed to ensnare him. Finch's operation was now playing a longer, more dangerous game, moving the attack from the physical streets into the nebulous realm of cyberspace, aiming to frame Elias not with a baggie of pills, but with the far more damaging spectre of compromised national security originating from within the president's own trusted circle. The trap was being set, far more intricate and potentially inescapable than anything Elias had faced before. Senator Finch's cyber operatives reported their success, albeit limited with chilling efficiency. They hadn't needed to execute a massive breach, just create enough digital smoke to imply a fire. Their work yielded a small but potent package. Network logs, carefully manipulated, showing several failed attempts originating from IP addresses associated with Elias Vance's school network, trying to access a non-public database on a Department of Commerce server. An encrypted file fragment, titled Embassy Security Overview Draft, found deleted from Elias's personal cloud storage account, planted via a brief vulnerability, exploited by a phishing link Elias had unknowingly clicked days earlier. And metadata suggesting Elias's personal laptop had briefly connected to a restricted White House internal network segment it wasn't authorized for, achieved through sophisticated Wi-Fi spoofing near a location Elias frequented. Individually, each piece might be explained away. Together, curated and presented out of context, they painted a disturbing picture of unauthorized digital curiosity emanating from someone with proximity to the president. With this ammunition secured, Finch initiated the next phase. An anonymous whistleblower, described only as a concerned government employee, delivered an encrypted data package containing these digital fragments to the office of the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a committee where Senator Finch held significant influence and chaired a key subcommittee. The accompanying message spoke gravely of potential security vulnerabilities and troubling online activities by an individual with privileged White House access, urging an immediate investigation to protect national interests. Finch, feigning surprise and deep concern when officially notified by the committee chairman, immediately called for a closed-door emergency hearing. Leveraging his position and playing on senators' inherent concerns about security breaches, he successfully pushed for the launch of a formal committee inquiry into the alleged security lapse surrounding the president's godson, Elias Vance. The announcement, though initially limited in detail due to the classified nature of the purported evidence, sent immediate shockwaves through the Washington political establishment. The carefully orchestrated leak achieved Finch's goal. A formal high-level investigation was now underway, casting suspicion not only on Elias, but directly on President Hayes's judgment and the integrity of White House security protocols. It was a political crisis manufactured from digital vapor. While the political storm erupted, Elias was already dealing with the lingering unease from the digital anomalies he'd noticed. Following the attempted drug planting and his report to Agent Thorne, the Secret Service, taking the threat seriously, had assigned a low-key technical security detail to liaise with him. They conducted a thorough forensic sweep of his devices and accounts. Working alongside these quiet, intense experts in a secure White House communications annex room, Elias watched as they meticulously analyzed logs, network traffic, and file systems. His own tech savviness allowed him to follow their work, pointing out inconsistencies he'd vaguely noticed earlier. The breakthrough came when analyzing the server logs supposedly showing his access attempts. The timestamps, when correlated with his known physical location via secure phone data and school attendance records, were impossible. He had been verifiably miles away during several of the alleged login attempts. Furthermore, the forensic signature of the planted file on his cloud storage bore markers inconsistent with his own devices or software, showing traces of advanced data injection techniques. The spoofed Wi-Fi connection left subtle residual code fragments on his laptop, indicative of a known man-in-the-middle attack vector. The evidence was clear, at least to the experts. Elias hadn't attempted any unauthorized access. His digital footprint had been deliberately maliciously fabricated. A formal inquiry launched based on planted digital fragments. It's a chilling escalation, turning cybersecurity concerns into political weapons. Do you think congressional committees have become too easily weaponized for these kinds of politically motivated attacks, potentially damaging innocent lives in the process? Comment number 1 with your view on the checks and balances needed. Elias and the experts now held irrefutable proof that the digital evidence driving the Senate inquiry was a sophisticated frame-up. Finding proof of the setup is a huge relief for Elias, but the damaging inquiry is already public. If you admire Elias's resilience and the skill of the tech experts who uncovered the truth, hit that like button and subscribe to see how they can possibly fight back against a political firestorm already raging. This discovery constituted a crucial false dawn, a potential key to his exoneration. But the knowledge felt almost impotent in the face of the political reality. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence had launched its inquiry based on the appearance of a breach. The damaging headlines were already out. The political machinery was in motion. How could Elias and the White House possibly diffuse a public scandal and a formal Senate investigation fueled by powerful enemies, even when they secretly held the proof that the entire premise was a lie? The truth felt like a shield discovered only after the arrow had already been loosed. The launch of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence inquiry, ostensibly into a minor potential security lapse, detonated like a bombshell in the hyper-partisan atmosphere of Washington, D.C., exactly as Senator Finch had intended. Holding the private knowledge that the digital evidence was fabricated felt like holding sand against a tidal wave of public accusation and political maneuvering. Finch masterfully orchestrated the ensuing firestorm. Leaks, carefully curated, and often misleading, began appearing almost daily, emanating from anonymous committee sources. News outlets hungry for conflict ran breathless headlines questioning White House security protocols and casting suspicion on the unnamed, presidentially connected minor. Cable news panels debated endlessly, with Finch's allies demanding transparency and accountability from the Hayes administration, while President Hayes's supporters struggled to defend against shadow allegations based on evidence they couldn't yet publicly refute without compromising ongoing internal investigations or revealing sensitive security measures. Senator Finch himself played the role of statesman gravely concerned for national security, using committee hearings not to genuinely investigate, but to create soundbites, subpoena administration officials for time-consuming testimony, and generally obstruct President Hayes's legislative agenda, which had been gaining momentum before this manufactured crisis erupted. Key votes were delayed, nominees stalled, and the administration's energy became increasingly consumed by managing the fallout from the inquiry. For President Hayes, the situation was politically excruciating. She possessed the forensic analysis proving Elias's innocence in the digital frame-up, shared by Agent Thorne and the Secret Service tech unit, yet releasing it prematurely could compromise sources and methods, be dismissed as self-serving by opponents controlling the inquiry narrative, and potentially reveal vulnerabilities Finch's operatives could exploit further. She found herself trapped, forced to publicly state her confidence in White House security, while privately knowing a malicious actor had successfully planted evidence to trigger this very crisis. The political pressure, fanned by Finch, mounted relentlessly. Editorials questioned her judgment. Whispers grew louder within her own party about the potential damage this family issue could cause. Reluctantly, agonizingly, President Hayes made a difficult decision, presented as a temporary measure out of an abundance of caution pending the inquiry's conclusion. Elias's physical access to certain areas of the White House complex would be temporarily restricted, and his already minimal public appearances alongside her would cease entirely. It was a move designed to appease critics and demonstrate seriousness, but for Elias, it felt like a profound betrayal, a public validation of the lies spun about him, even though his godmother privately reassured him of her unwavering belief in his innocence and her determination to expose the truth. Inside the White House, the atmosphere shifted palpably around Elias. Though still residing within its protective sphere, he felt increasingly like an inmate in a gilded cage. Staffers who had previously greeted him with warm smiles now offered brief, tight-lipped nods or avoided eye contact altogether. He overheard hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when he entered a room. The friendly banter ceased. He was treated with an overly cautious formality that felt more isolating than outright hostility. Even Agent Thorne and the security detail assigned to him, while professionally protective, now carried an air of heightened, stressful vigilance whenever he was near certain technology or sensitive areas. He understood the political necessity, the impossible position his godmother was in, but understanding didn't lessen the sting of isolation or the crushing weight of guilt. He felt like a contaminant, the source of a political plague infecting the administration, endangering the work of the woman who had taken him in and treated him like a son. School became a refuge and a torment. While his close friends remained fiercely loyal, the wider student body buzzed with rumors fueled by the media coverage, and he faced awkward questions and suspicious glances. He withdrew into himself, spending more time alone, the vibrant energy of youth overshadowed by the constant grinding pressure of the scandal. He saw the strain on President Hayes during their brief, carefully managed interactions, the worry behind her reassuring smiles, and his guilt intensified. Senator Finch, observing the chaos he had unleashed, allowed himself a measure of satisfaction. The inquiry was successfully paralyzing key aspects of Hayes's agenda. The president was, clearly on the defensive, forced to make politically damaging concessions regarding her own godson. Elias Vance, the unsuspecting pawn, seemed effectively neutralized and isolated. The digital frame-up, though based on fabrication, had achieved its primary political objectives. Yet, Finch perhaps underestimated the quiet resolve hardening within. Elias, a resolve born not of privilege, but of the weary resilience forged by navigating a world that too often judged him before knowing him, now amplified by the desperate need to protect his godmother from the attack he had inadvertently brought to her doorstep. The isolation intended to break him was instead clarifying his purpose. The weight of the political siege and his enforced isolation pressed down on Elias Vance, threatening to suffocate him in guilt and helplessness. Confined within the strangely isolating grandeur of the White House complex, treated with cautious distance even by those tasked with his protection, he felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a crisis he had unwillingly caused. He knew he was innocent, knew the digital evidence driving the Senate inquiry was a sophisticated fabrication. The Secret Service tech team had proven that much to him, and presumably to the president's inner circle. Yet that knowledge felt useless, trapped behind walls of political expediency and national security protocols, while Senator Finch continued his relentless public assault, damaging President Hayes and painting Elias as a reckless liability. Days turned into a week, then two, with the inquiry grinding on, generating negative headlines, and Elias feeling increasingly like a passive victim, a pawn whose only role was to absorb damage meant for his godmother. But beneath the surface layer of guilt and despair, a different feeling began to stir. A cold, simmering anger born of injustice, amplified by the frustration of knowing the truth but being unable to wield it. He refused to be just a pawn. He wouldn't let Finch destroy his godmother's presidency, using him as the weapon. If the official channels were too slow, too compromised, or too politically cautious to act decisively on the forensic evidence they possessed, then maybe, just maybe, he could find something himself, something undeniable, something that pointed directly at the source of the frame-up. He was 17, not a seasoned investigator, but he wasn't naive. He had grown up adjacent to the highest levels of power, observing, listening. He was a digital native, comfortable navigating the complexities of cyberspace in ways many older security professionals weren't. And he possessed a unique, intimate knowledge of his own digital life, the context that the fabricated evidence lacked. Against the likely advice of Agent Thorne, had he asked, Elias resolved to launch his own, discreet parallel investigation. Working late at night in his room, using encrypted connections and anonymizing software, he started where the official forensic team had left off. He meticulously re-examined the reports detailing the planted file on his cloud drive, the spoofed login attempts, the malware signature from the phishing email he'd almost ignored. The experts had focused on proving the evidence was fake. Elias focused on finding its origin. He delved into the metadata of the planted file fragment, noticing minute inconsistencies in the encryption layering that suggested a specific non-standard software tool had been used. He cross-referenced the IP addresses logged during the spoofed access attempts, finding that while most were cleverly routed through anonymizing services, one brief connection packet seemed to resolve, momentarily, to a server block known to be leased by a shadowy private intelligence firm based in Eastern Europe, a firm occasionally whispered about in cybersecurity circles as specializing in political black ops. He researched the specific malware signature identified on his laptop, finding sparse mentions on obscure hacker forums discussing its use in targeted espionage campaigns, often attributed to a specific elusive hacking collective code named Nightshade. These were small pieces, circumstantial on their own, perhaps dismissed by official investigators as inconclusive or leading to dead ends. But Elias felt a pattern emerging. He then turned his attention inward, meticulously reviewing his own digital history, his communication logs, his deleted files, searching for any anomaly, any interaction, however innocuous it seemed at the time that might have been an earlier unnoticed probe or contact from Finch's network. He remembered an odd direct message request on a gaming platform months ago from an unknown user, asking seemingly innocent questions about DC life, a request he had ignored. He found a slightly corrupted file from a school project collaboration that had forced him to briefly lower his system security settings weeks before the main digital attack began. Could these have been preparatory steps? He started carefully, anonymously probing the edges of the dark web, searching for mentions of Nightshade, the European server block, or chatter related to high-profile political targets, using advanced search operators and navigating through layers of security. He found a heavily encrypted forum where cybersecurity mercenaries sometimes boasted elliptically about their exploits. Searching for keywords related to the malware signature and the specific type of file encryption used on the planted cloud fragment, he hit upon a single, cryptic post from a user named Silas Marner, Reborn. The post, made weeks before the Senate inquiry launched, referenced a tricky White House-adjacent canary, and complained about the difficulty of planting a digital nightingale that would sing convincingly for a certain hill-climbing finch. It was coded, deniable, but the combination of White House-adjacent, digital nightingale, possibly referencing the planted Project Nightingale Notes file name, or just a metaphor, and the unmistakable reference to Senator Finch sent a jolt of adrenaline through Elias. It wasn't definitive proof, not something admissible in court, but it was a direct link, a digital breadcrumb trail leading from the sophisticated cyber attack back towards Senator Finch's known circle of political operatives. He meticulously documented his findings, taking encrypted screenshots, preserving logs, understanding the critical significance of this fragile connection. He, a 17-year-old kid, armed with a laptop and a burning sense of injustice, had potentially found the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy, a clue missed or perhaps deemed too risky to pursue through official channels. He now held a dangerous piece of information, a weapon he wasn't sure how to safely deploy, but one that shifted his role from mere pawn to potential knight in this high-stakes political chess game. The isolation still pressed in, but now it was mingled with a fierce, determined purpose. Elias knew the digital breadcrumbs he had uncovered, the cryptic forum post mentioning Finch, the malware signature, the server trace, were potentially explosive but also circumstantial and easily deniable if handled improperly. He couldn't risk leaking them anonymously himself. They needed official validation and strategic deployment. After carefully encrypting and documenting his findings, he used the secure communication channel established by Agent Thorne to request an urgent, in-person meeting citing discovery of critical information pertinent to the ongoing inquiry and security situation. Thorne, recognizing the gravity in Elias's tone, arranged a discreet meeting immediately within a secure, sensitive compartmented information facility, SCIF, deep within the White House complex. Inside the soundproof, electronically shielded room, Elias calmly laid out his investigation, presenting the screenshots, the analysis connecting the malware to the Nightshade group, the suspicious server block, and, most damningly, the forum. post explicitly referencing Finch and the White House-adjacent Canary. Agent Thorne listened intently, his expression hardening as Elias spoke. He recognized the significance instantly. While not yet a smoking gun proving Finch ordered the frame up, it provided the first concrete vector linking the sophisticated cyber attack back to Finch's known orbit of political black ops. Thorne immediately initiated two actions. First, tasking a specialized Secret Service cyber forensics unit to independently verify Elias's findings and attempt to trace the Silas Marner Reborn alias further. Second, scheduling an immediate, highly classified briefing for President Hayes and her Chief of Staff. The atmosphere within the President's inner circle shifted from defensive crisis management to cautious, offensive planning. They now had a potential weapon to fight back against Finch, though deploying it without tipping him off or compromising their own investigation was critical. But Senator Finch hadn't risen to his position of power through carelessness. His paranoia was as finely tuned as his political ambition. Whether it was through his ongoing surveillance on Elias detecting the unusual late-night activity and subsequent CEF meeting, or perhaps the Silas Marner Reborn operative suddenly going silent after Elias's online probing tripped an internal alert or even a well-placed leak from someone aware of the Secret Service's renewed cyber focus, Finch received word that the boy was no longer just a passive target. He was actively investigating, had found something, and had reported it directly to White House security. The carefully constructed walls of deniability Finch relied upon were suddenly in danger of crumbling. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped the senator. If Elias Vance, armed with White House resources, could definitively link him to the digital frame-up, it wouldn't just end the politically useful inquiry, it would mean criminal charges, disgrace, the utter destruction of his career and legacy. He couldn't allow that to happen. Elias Vance had to be silenced, permanently and immediately, before whatever he knew could be verified and acted upon. The order went out through Evelyn Reed to a different cutout, one reserved for operations requiring absolute deniability and maximum finality. The instructions were chillingly simple. Eliminate Elias Vance within the next 24 hours. It looked like a tragic accident, a robbery gone wrong, anything but a targeted hit. Ensure no traceable connection back to Finch or his office. The operative tasked with the assignment was not a clumsy cop or a cyber mercenary, but a professional fixer, a ghost in the system specializing in creating fatal, untraceable accidents for high-value targets. The plan was swift and ruthless, exploiting the knowledge that Elias, despite restrictions, still occasionally traveled under Secret Service escort between his temporary White House lodging and a secure off-site tutoring facility. The fixer identified a vulnerable point in the usually secure routine, a specific underground parking garage near the tutoring center used for discreet vehicle transfers. On the designated afternoon, Elias finished his tutoring session. He felt a cautious optimism for the first time in weeks, knowing his discovery might finally turn the tide. He was escorted by two Secret Service agents down to the quiet, echoing, concrete levels of the parking garage, where his armored transport vehicle awaited. As they approached the designated vehicle in the relatively deserted section of the garage, a large, nondescript utility van suddenly swerved around a concrete pillar blocking their path. Simultaneously, the overhead lights in their immediate section flickered and died, plunging the area into semi-darkness, lit only by emergency exit signs and the distant glow from other levels. It happened incredibly fast. Before the Secret Service, agents could fully react to the unexpected van and sudden darkness. Two figures emerged swiftly from the van's side door. They moved with professional, unnerving speed and silence, not like thugs but like trained operatives. One deployed a device emitting a high-frequency sonic pulse, momentarily disorienting the agents, while the other moved directly, purposefully, towards Elias, a silenced pistol equipped with a laser sight appearing in his hand, the red dot instantly fixing on Elias's chest. There were no warnings, no demands, just lethal intent. Elias saw the red dot bloom on his shirt, saw the cold professional focus in the attacker's eyes, and understood in a terrifying instant. This wasn't harassment, wasn't a frame-up. This was an execution. His discovery hadn't bought him safety. It had signed his death warrant. The red dot glowed menacingly on Elias Vance's chest, a harbinger of imminent death in the sudden gloom of the parking garage. Terror, cold and absolute, threatened to lock his limbs. But in that same microsecond, honed by weeks of hyper-vigilance and the acute awareness of being hunted, instinct and training kicked in. As the attacker's finger tightened on the trigger, Elias didn't freeze, he reacted. With a choked cry, he threw himself sideways, using the bulk of the armored Secret Service vehicle as immediate cover, simultaneously shouting the prearranged distress code word Agent Thorne had drilled into him after the attempted drug planting. "Watch light!" Even as he dove, the distinct thwip of a silenced gunshot echoed unnervingly close, smacking into the bulletproof paneling where he had stood a heartbeat before. The Secret Service agents, though momentarily staggered by the sonic pulse, were not incapacitated. Thorne, anticipating precisely this kind of desperate, high-stakes move from Finch once Elias reported his findings, had placed them on maximum alert. The routine transport was anything but. It was effectively bait, conducted with enhanced countermeasures and unseen tactical support nearby. The agent nearest Elias recovered first, drawing his weapon and returning fire towards the attacker. Emerging from the van, shouting into his radio, "Watchlight confirmed, hostiles engaging, level 4, sub-level 2. The second agent, shielding his ears instinctively from the lingering sonic effect, engaged the other operative who was providing cover fire. What the attackers hadn't known was that Agent Thorne's counterplan was already in motion. The moment Elias had confirmed his findings about the digital trail leading towards Finch, Thorne, with President Hayes' authorization, had initiated discreet but intense surveillance on Finch's known fixers and suspected Black Ops channels. They had anticipated a potential move against Elias, likely involving physical harm disguised as an accident. The seemingly deserted parking garage wasn't deserted at all. From concealed positions behind concrete pillars and parked vehicles, Hayes Secret Service Counter-Assault Team, KT, prepositioned based on Thorne's assessment of likely ambush points, emerged with overwhelming force. Coordinated beams from tactical flashlights cut through the manufactured darkness, targeting the attackers. "Federal agents, drop your weapons, now!" The firefight was brutally short and one-sided. The professional fixer, perhaps realizing the setup, attempted to retreat towards the utility van but was swiftly neutralized by precise shots from the CAT team. His accomplice, pinned down by the combined fire of the escort agents and the tactical team, surrendered quickly, hands raised high. Within seconds, the immediate threat was over. Elias, breathing heavily behind the vehicle, was quickly secured by relieved agents who checked him for injuries. The captured operative, stripped of weapons and communication devices, offered immediate, tangible evidence. His specialized, untraceable equipment, burner phone logs, quickly retrieved before remote wipe commands could activate, and encrypted. Communications pointed directly towards the shadowy security firm Finch used, the same firm whose server block Elias had traced. Combined with Elias's documented findings proving the digital frame-up, and potentially enhanced by forensic evidence recovered from the now-deceased lead attacker, or the captured accomplice possibly willing to cooperate for a deal, the case against Senator Alastair Finch solidified with devastating speed. President Hayes, briefed in real time by Agent Thorne, acted decisively. There was no more need for cautious political maneuvering. Armed with verifiable proof of conspiracy, attempted murder, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and the sophisticated digital frame-up, she authorized the Justice Department, working in conjunction with the FBI and Secret Service, to move forward. The Attorney General held an emergency press conference, laying out the shocking details of the plot against Elias Vance, presenting key pieces of irrefutable evidence linking the attacks directly back to Senator Finch's operation, and announcing Finch was under federal investigation. The political firestorm Finch had ignited now turned back on him with gale force intensity. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence immediately suspended its inquiry into Elias, its credibility shattered. Finch's allies deserted him en masse, rushing to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Facing imminent indictment, public disgrace, and the collapse of his entire political world, Senator Alastair Finch announced his immediate resignation from the Senate, his career ending in ignominy. Elias Vance was publicly and completely exonerated. The White House issued a statement detailing the conspiracy against him, praising his courage and resilience, and condemning the politically motivated attacks. The cloud of suspicion lifted, replaced by a wave of public sympathy and outrage directed at the disgraced senator. Elias walked out of the White House complex into the sunlight, no longer a suspected liability, but a survivor, albeit one carrying invisible wounds. The ordeal had changed him. He was still 17, still needing to finish school and think about college, but the forced maturity, the confrontation with genuine evil and systemic injustice, had left an indelible mark. Later, sitting quietly with President Hayes in the Oval Office, the imposing room now feeling more like a familiar living room, they spoke not of politics but of the personal cost. Hayes expressed her profound regret and guilt over the danger he had faced due to his connection to her. Elias, in turn, acknowledged the harsh lessons learned about power, prejudice, and the complex burdens they both carried. Their bond, tested by fire, felt different, deeper perhaps, but also shadowed by the knowledge of the darkness they had confronted together. He eventually returned to his classes, finished his college applications, tried to reclaim the rhythms of a normal teenage life. But the memory of Officer Donovan's sneering face in the metro station, the fear in the back of the transport van, the chilling realization of Finch's plot, these experiences couldn't be erased. He found himself looking at the world with older, warier eyes, more attuned to the subtle currents of bias and the potential for abuse of power. He didn't know yet what path his future would take, but he knew with absolute certainty that he would never forget the journey that began with a racist assumption in a crowded subway station and ended with a confrontation against the highest levels of political corruption, a journey that proved resilience can bloom even in the most hostile soil. Elias Vance's journey from a seemingly routine, prejudiced metro stop to the center of a high-stakes political conspiracy offers profound lessons. Foremost, it underscores the dangerous and pervasive nature of racial profiling, demonstrating how snap judgments based on appearance, like a black teenager in a hoodie, can ignite devastating consequences, regardless of the individual's true identity or connections. The initial racist profiling by Officer Donovan wasn't just an isolated incident. It became the catalyst, the exploitable entry point for calculated political malevolence. The story vividly illustrates how personal prejudice can intersect with political ambition to create a truly toxic brew. Senator Finch saw Elias not as a person, but as a tool, a means to attack President Hayes. This highlights the vulnerability of individuals connected to power, especially minors, who can unwillingly become pawns in games they never sought to play. It also reveals the frightening capacity for abuse of power at multiple levels, from a street-level officer falsifying a report out of fear and resentment, to a powerful senator orchestrating frame-ups and even attempted murder with chilling impunity. Furthermore, Elias's experience showcases remarkable resilience. Despite facing escalating threats, public smears, physical harassment, multiple frame-up attempts, and ultimately a lethal attack, he refused to be merely a victim. His vigilance, intelligence, and determination to fight back by uncovering the digital truth were crucial. Yet, the story doesn't shy away from the cost. Even vindication comes with trauma and a changed perspective. It reminds us that navigating systemic bias requires not just strength, but often access to resources and powerful allies, like the Secret Service and the President herself, resources unavailable to most facing similar injustice, albeit on a less dramatic scale. Elias's ordeal began with a single act of profiling based on his appearance. How much do you think snap judgments like Officer Donovan's contribute to escalating conflicts in our society? And when political figures target family members or young people, where should the line be drawn? We'd genuinely appreciate hearing your thoughts on this complex story. Comment number 1 if you believe racial profiling is the root cause that enabled all subsequent events, or comment number 2 if you think political ambition was the primary driver. Your insights help us all understand these issues better. If you were moved by Elias's resilience and outraged by the injustice he faced, please show your support by giving this video a like, subscribing for more stories that challenge and engage, and sharing it so others can join the conversation. Thank you for investing your time with us today. We hope this story serves as a reminder to look beyond appearances and question the motives behind the narratives we encounter. Be well and be aware.